compared with the suffering of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ suffered unbelievably as well. The big difference is that for Jesus Christ, he was taking upon himself the sins of all mankind. Job never had that burden. He only had his own sin to deal with, which was enough. So while many people suffer, no one has ever suffered to the extent that Jesus Christ suffered. But then no one has ever experienced glory and victory the way Jesus Christ had when he came out of the grave on the third day. To those who long for death that does not come, who search for it far more than for hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave. He obviously is not talking about the non-believer here, because there's not much rejoicing there. As a pastor, one of the most difficult things to do were funerals. It was always a challenge. Although I found it easier to do a funeral for somebody that I knew well and knew their life and knew they had served the Lord faithfully over many years and knew their eternal destiny had been secured. What was more difficult to do was a funeral of somebody I did not know or somebody I knew to be a non-believer. At that point, the only thing you can do is to comfort the family and try to lead them to understand the goodness and the love of God. And there would have been very few funerals that I ever did where I did not get up and say at some point, God loves everyone here. And that's a message we need to hear. In the time of suffering, in the time of loss, to understand that we are loved by God. I knew of a pastor in Pittsburgh who used funerals as an outreach ministry to reach souls for Christ, and he would give invitations at funerals. Some pastors do that. And he saw his church growing because he was in a community. His church was in a housing development with a lot of low-income people, and he used that as being the local church, and a lot of folks from that development would come to him and come to his church, and he used that to spread the gospel to those in his community. We have good news. Jesus Christ is Lord. He is King. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? He's questioning, why does God live life? But the key phrase here, and it's easy to me to miss, is whom God has hedged in. When I was pastoring in Warren, Ohio, which was before I went to Pittsburgh, there was a woman there who faithfully attended the Wednesday morning prayer meeting, and she would pray all the time for God to put a hedge of protection up around the church, around this one, around that one. And we see here a hedge, God putting a hedge. What does a hedge ultimately do? It is protection from the outside world, similar to a wall. Even in our suffering, God can protect us and be with us and encourage us. That hedge of protection. How many of us need that hedge of protection? Maybe she was truly onto something. For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only turmoil. Sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. Would be easy for us to stand in judgment of Job. But the thing that we need to understand that you can never truly understand another's suffering. You can try to have empathy, you can try to have love and compassion, but we really do not know the depth of someone else's suffering. Yes, Vince?
There's a young pastor, Jared Wilson is his name. And last Monday he committed suicide. He was pastoring a large church. He was actually connected with Greg Laurie, if you knew Greg Laurie is. He pastors Harvest.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know him real well.
He pastors a very large church in
California?
Riverside, California.
Yeah.
And they have many satellite churches. Well, this Jared Wilson, he was pastoring one of the satellite churches, and he battled depression. And he even started a ministry to help people who are battling depression. And like you say, you don't know the demons that people are fighting. And,
And we should not stand in judgment of others because we don't know. Two people can go through the exact same thing and have totally different reactions. One can see hope and see that I'm going to get through this, and another lose absolute hope and say, there's no way out of this.
You know, when I was a young pastor, I was 100% convinced that everybody that committed suicide didn't make it to heaven. And I would never preach this from the pulpit because you never know when someone is just right on the edge and all they need is just a little glimmer of hope that maybe I can commit suicide and still make it. I would never share that from the pulpit. But the bottom line is that, God will have the last say in a person's life, and He knows what frame of mind they're in and what they can be held accountable for,
There have been many studies on grief. And in fact, let me read a little bit about what it says here. Most pastors would know this. They would have at least had it in Bible school or seminary. Taking classes on death and dying. It's important for pastors to study that. Many experts say there are stages to grief. So if you are grieving, you are going through various stages. You may not realize it. Somebody may have never really told you this. But these are the stages that individuals, some have more intense stages than others. Some might kind of skip through one or another. But this is generally speaking to everyone that grieves. And we all grieve. And grief can be more than just losing a loved one. It can be losing a job.
Divorce.
It can be a divorce. It can be a loss of a child. It can be a loss of income. It can be a loss of so many things. Having to move. So there are many different things. The first is denial. To deny that what has happened has really happened. To just say that really didn't happen. From denial, we move into anger. And many times, individuals will get angry with God. They will reason that if God is God and He can do anything, then why didn't He intercede and stop this from happening? And since He didn't stop this, then I'm mad at God. Well, God can take your anger. He's a big boy. He can take it. But that's displaced anger. Quite the opposite is true. That God does not cause things to happen. He can allow them. But He is a good God. He is a loving God. And everything that happens, happens for a reason. This is for the life of the believer. For the non-believer, that's not true. But if we have our life in God's hands, what He is doing and allowing is for our good. So a stage after denial is anger, and then there's the bargaining. Bargaining with God. That maybe God can make it better. That leads to depression. Depression takes many different forms, and there are some who fall into clinical depression. That would be a depression that needs to be treated by a professional. Definitely a psychologist, and maybe even a psychiatrist. The difference between the two is great. A psychiatrist is a psychologist who has been to medical school. He is a medical doctor with a specialty in psychiatry. And so therefore he or she can prescribe medications. A psychologist cannot legally prescribe medications. They can't do that. At George Jr., we have a couple of psychiatrists. And you would be surprised the number of youth we have that are on drugs that are prescribed, Vince knows this to be true, prescribed by the psychiatrist on staff. And it's for a myriad of different issues. There may be some there who have medical issues, but a lot of it is psychological issues due to a variety of things. The sad thing is that the care that the psychiatrist gives is minimal. He's only with each child for a very small amount of time. He doesn't really get to delve into it. That's just the way it is. So there is depression. And finally, the last step of grief is accepting it. Saying, okay, this is the way it is. It's not going to change. I need to move on. I need to make changes in my life. If it is due to a loss of job, then we need to go out and find another job. If it is due to a divorce, then maybe try to figure out what caused the divorce. And do an honest evaluation. If it's the loss of a loved one, you just accept the fact that they're gone, that they're in heaven, and you will see them again. So there is this acceptance. While we don't know all that Job experienced, his words in 3:1-10 seem to reflect dark depression, probably even bordering on clinical depression. Probably, had there been such a thing, he would have needed the care of a psychiatrist and maybe some drugs, but those things did not exist at that time. And he pulled through all right. One should read Job's word with a desire to recognize the toll it takes on a person. Grief can cloud one's ability to see the big picture of life. Grief can blind us to see the big picture. We become myopic and focusing on just one thing. And there's so much more to the picture than that. The gloom of Job's grief could be heard in his desire that the night should be barren and the absence of joy, that those who curse day should curse that day, that the morning stars should be dark without hope of daylight. The expression, those who curse days, may be a reference to professional cursers of that time. This may serve to intensify the fervency of Job's desire. This is to not minimize the suffering of others. When we saw on the television the pictures coming out of the Bahamas, your heart has to go out. Here are people that by and large don't have a whole lot to begin with, and then to have it looks like a war zone. I mean, just so little left. And while it is true that many of us cannot physically go there, we can get involved in various ways. And I noticed on one of the news reports, they were on the runway of one of the airports that finally got open, and in the background was a large cargo jet. And on the side it said Samaritan's Purse. Samaritan's Purse is a branch ministry of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. That came first. Billy Graham started that. When Franklin came of age and got right with God, he saw some needs and used the Billy Graham organization as a branch to meeting the needs of people in times of suffering. Hence the birth of Samaritan's Purse. They are the people who sponsor Operation Christmas Child. It's something that we have done here. Thousands of churches do it. Millions upon millions of packages have been sent around the world to those in desperate situations with the reminder that Christmas is about the birth of Christ. I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, only turmoil. We continue on next week, for the next couple of weeks, in Job's book. And in early October, we move into the Gospel of John, which is a good gospel.
You were talking about the stages